Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. I'm Ty Carr, and with me this week, Jack DiMatteo, AJ Wheeler,
How's
and
it going?
Charlie Zigman.
Hi.
As always, we're talking business news from an accountant's perspective. And here's what we've got coming down this week. Use your own name or use a brand name for your business. I'll give you a hint. As the managing partner of Ty Carr Advisory, I have a thought on this. Employees and execs burning out at record rates. McDonald's is spying on and tracking social media of employees who are engaged in the movement to raise minimum wage. CPA mobility. States are taking a look at this issue. And what the world will look like post-COVID. Fry's, a popular electronics store, is going out of business. And we'll round it up with article from the Wall Street Journal, companies put the best face on COVID-19's impact. All right, well, let's get into it with AJ.
All right, thanks, Ty. So our first article for this week comes from Entrepreneur, the digital magazine, and the title of it is "Should You Use Your Own Name or Create a Brand Name for Your Business?" So I thought this was interesting because it's actually something I hadn't thought about, but I had thought about in a different context. Essentially, what this article lays out is kind of the reasons to use a brand name as opposed to your own name to name your business, and they give you a couple reasons for it. And so I'd like to kind of get your guys' take on whether or not this makes sense, or especially from a CPA firm kind of standpoint, because traditionally CPA firms have used names of partners that started the firm. And then eventually when those partners leave, it kind of gets condensed to letters, but we'll get into that. So a brand name, as opposed to a person or founder's name, suggests scale, is what they're saying. It has a different impression of like if it's John Andrews Plumbing or something like that, it doesn't denote as much as like, Roto-Rooter or something like that. It kind of, a brand name kind of suggests scale. A brand name gives you room to grow. What happens if you're a founder that then ends up selling the business, or, like we talked about in the beginning, CPA firms, if, you tenure out and you retire, then, going forward, if you're, Lewis and CK accounting firm and Lewis and CK aren't there anymore, do people ask where they are? A brand name provides an opportunity to express ideas. I think this is probably more of a marketing person's spin on what a brand name means, but you can kind of convey, more, I guess, with a brand name than you can with a personal name. And then a brand name may be easier to spell and pronounce. And we may have somebody on the panel that has something to say about that, but we'll see. A brand name may also be more distinctive than a person's name. So, if you have a brand name that's, like Starbucks, for instance, if that was named after, somebody's name, is that as recognizable as somebody's name / coffee, I guess. But I'd like your guys' take. Do you think they're off the ball? And especially kind of redirecting it to the accounting space. I think traditionally accounting firms have often been named after the partners that have started the firm. And then, for instance, I'll use my personal experience. I worked at a accounting firm. If you look on my LinkedIn, the two partners that started it and the firm were named after no longer worked there while I was there. And people would often ask where the Kern or the Thompson was. And actually they shortened it, and we just called ourselves KT instead of Kern and Thompson. And we often referred to the firm as that. And I don't think it was, it was probably just catchier to say or whatever, but I never really gave it much thought before I read this article. So I'd kind of like to get your guys' take on it.
Well, I definitely have an opinion on this. So, given our firm is called Ty Carr Advisory, I really do believe it depends on where you are in the curve on the growth and size of your firm as to whether it matters or not. I think that the things that you were listing as they were saying advantages of using a brand name, I think that's fine, but it's not I don't think it actually matters in a professional service environment when the firm is small. And so, when I think about it, it's like, well, at the point that we are, for example, we're a multi-person firm. So we've got multiple people on our team that are kind of principal service providers. I think, but we're still small. And I think in that context, the name of the firm almost doesn't even matter. I think when we were smaller than we are now, when the firm was like me and maybe one other person, then having the firm named my name was really helpful, because that was the only brand there was. I had 20 years of experience in the Portland metro area and a large network of people, and so the business being my name was helpful because my name is known, and some new brand name that I was going to create was not known or not going to be known. But I really firmly believe that, like, for a firm like ours that has, at this point, what do we have? 6, we may be going on this year, 7 or so principal consultants kind of working. That's still relatively small. I don't think the brand name matters. I really believe what matters is the individual personal brands of our team members. I think that is the whole thing. I think that is what brings people in. And I think that small firms who focus on trying to create a brand name are totally missing the boat, because it's their people that are going to bring in clients and drive their firm forward. It's not the firm and its brand. Now, if we were a much larger firm, like a national firm or something of that nature, then having a brand name at that point may be more meaningful. But I think in the small professional service business context, I think either your own name or it just doesn't matter. And I've seen lots of accounting firms do this, small firms that create these brand names, and it's all about this idea of trying to look bigger or in hopes that they will be bigger. And years later, it's like, what does that name even mean, or how does it even get you traction in the market at that point? So yeah, I think branding a independent brand name is very difficult to do for a small business. But I'm biased because that's my view and how I've done it. But I'd love to hear contrary opinions.
Well, it's interesting because you have to be even if you do select a brand name, you have to be very careful with that brand name, because you can select a name that is going to limit you. It could be confusing, and I've read stats on it. There's many small businesses will go into business, and I forget what the exact percentage is, but it's significantly higher. It's 25 or 50% actually end up doing something different or offering some kind of service different than what they originally launched a small firm to do. So if you pick a name based on what your original intention is, you might be shooting yourself in the foot down the road, because it's going to be a very confusing name. And I think Ty brings up an excellent point. Regardless of the name, the real work is how well you communicate that brand, regardless of what you've named it, and how consistent you stay and stand in front of customers and marketing those services. So obviously it does take some thought, but you're probably never going to be wrong if you put your name on it and go with that firm, because you haven't limited yourself. If you are going to go ahead and pick a brand name, it's probably something that you want to make sure you've probably you sit down with somebody that's got experience in branding and kind of talk these things through, because it can be very tricky. You can actually hurt yourself by picking a name that doesn't fit what you're going to be doing long term.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I just want to kind of add on that I think it also depends on what you're selling. I mean, of course, we're focused here in a very principle-centric business where we're selling ourselves as services to people. And so for us, having the name behind it, it matters a lot more than, say, if we were selling soda or something that is an impulse buy that people are going to be more likely to just associate a name they've heard a lot. Kodak or whatever the name might be. And so I think that's a big part in it as well. But yeah, like you said, I think in our firm, it really has been just a matter of who's, the people get used to the people that they work with, and the name ends up being not that huge of a factor once they're in and working with us.
Yeah, that's a great point, Charlie. I think, cards on the table, we've actually had internal discussions about this. If Ty's name associated with the firm would then mean that he needed to be involved with every client that we had, or if that expectation was there. And I think, we've landed on the fact that if we're providing good service and we're providing that, for lack of a better word, delivering on our own personal brands and what we believe the service should be rendered, then I don't think that's an issue. But the nice thing is TCA can be rolled into total company accounting or something. We can come up with another acronym that we can use. So I guess the rule there then is, if you're going to name it after somebody's name, maybe have the acronym so you can switch it on a dime if you need to be, if you need to. So anyway, Jack, you got another article for us?
I sure do. And this article shouldn't probably come as a surprise to anybody, because I know we had a fairly similar article a few weeks ago talking about, I think it was CFOs stepping down. Employees and executives are burning out at a record rate, which I don't think should really probably surprise anybody, because, coming off of a year of COVID, I think, I'll reiterate what I kind of said then, where I think people have endured a lot more pressure than they probably have in their lifetime. And I think, it's not just the pressure at the top. I think a lot of employees have if they're fortunate enough to keep that job, they've been looking over their shoulder. They've seen their hours cut. I think a lot of people, be it executives, be it employees, staff, I think a lot of people have been under a tremendous amount of pressure, and pressure over time. Let's face it, it wears you down. It wears you down. A lot of anxiety, and I think you're going to burn out. I think you're going to fatigue. What does the group think about that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, if there's been anything that's been kind of a theme throughout this whole pandemic, is whether or not, if you had a job or if you didn't, there's a lot of repetition in it, because we're all kind of living the same life. It feels like Groundhog Day a lot of the time. And so I can imagine people getting burned out on any of their routines, regardless of what that is. But yeah, I think that anytime you have these big events that really shake up things, then it just means that there's going to be more and more stress and more kind of pressure put on everybody. And, I've definitely felt it. I'm sure you guys have as well. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that.
I suspect there's some amount of, because there's angst about what there was, at least for a while, and I think there probably still is some angst about, well, what does this all mean to the economy? What would this mean to my job? I think, we've talked before about kind of the data coming out and showing that people are actually just working more. And I think part of it is, it's like human nature, right? It's like you become wanting to make sure you prove yourself that you're still valuable, and you've got this pressure. You feel like if things are not going to be going well, and and maybe unemployment's going to be on the rise, you want to make sure that you're still considered valuable, or maybe you're concerned about the prospects of the company that you're working for. So I'm sure all of that weighs on folks.
Well, and I think we've talked about on the podcast before, where the switch from what we would call a traditional, business, I guess, meetings and flow has been flipped on its head, where everybody's essentially has the ability to work 24/7 if they choose. And it's on the individual to put up those barriers and to, disable that technology to not be available 24/7 to avoid this kind of burnout. But that takes diligence. And I think sometimes people miss that diligence to do so. So again, I think I'd like to reiterate that, creating, and Ty's talked about it, schedule your work, and to make that during, work hours, and then schedule your time away from work, and put in the technology stops to create that off time, I guess, because you can be sitting there. We've all had clients that respond to us at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. when they're thinking about something, or 11 p.m. And if you see that pop up, I think, or even like a review note, if you're working at a CPA firm or something that happens from somebody that's working at 10 p.m., it can often feel like you need to respond to that immediately. But I was actually talking about this very instance with a client this week, and she was pining for a time when, I guess, a return to normal, but what's funny is that I think the same person was kind of before the pandemic pining to work from home more. So I think it's kind of like, the grass is always greener on the other side. And I think a mix of I think what we're going to see, and I think, in a perfect world, when the pandemic ends, I think you're going to see, in a perfect world, this nice mismatch of a digital kind of always on remote flow, workflow kind of thing, mixed with in-person, get stuff done kind of meeting and in-person, carved out time that'll happen. And I think, never waste a good disaster or whatever it's called. I think there's a lot of learning in all of this that's going to happen. And I think we'll all, as funny as it sounds, we'll all be the better for it afterwards, because I think we'll have seen both sides and see the pros and cons of both the remote work side and the in-person work side. And I think you'll be able to meld, hopefully we'll be able to meld those two together and have a situation where you have the best of both worlds. Hopefully not the worst of both worlds, right? Where you will be working until midnight and still have to go to 4-hour in-person meetings, but we'll see. But I guess I'm more optimistic to see more of that blend of, like 3 days out of the office working remotely and 2 days doing things that you need to do in person. That makes more sense, like training or something like that. So we'll see. But I think burnout is ever present out of a pandemic or in the middle of a pandemic, and you just have to be mindful of what causes it and how to avoid it and how to then complete your task and keep the work rolling.
I agree. It sounds counterintuitive, but you have to force yourself to relax. If you find a way to unplug, find a way to break the monotony of this routine, this Groundhog's Day that Charlie mentions that we all seem to be in. How about you, Charlie? You have an article for us this week?
Yeah, I've got another one we can talk about. So in Vice.com, there was an article called "McDonald's Secretive Intel Team Spies on the Fight for $15 Workers," internal documents show. And so basically what is going on here is that there are a bunch of people who work for McDonald's who are trying to start this movement for fighting for a $15 minimum wage. And McDonald's has seen that, become offended, and decided to go ahead and put together a team of people to spy on them and put them into their right place. And so basically what's happening is they watch their different posts that they make on social media, and they have kind of a database that they put together that tries to track where these movements are happening, who are the key players. And according to them, and I'm going to use a quote from the article because I really think it's a great quote in that it's a terrible quote, which is that we want to figure out how and where the Fight for 15 movement will attack the brand, and we want to focus on identifying any potential safety threats that could pose harm to our crew, franchisees, and customers in the nearly 4,000 communities globally in which we operate. And so I thought that was particularly upsetting because when I think about the idea of a team of people going to social media, trying to organize a movement for minimum wage, and then how is that then going to, compromise the safety of people who work at this place? It feels to me like somebody who is biased trying to make the issue about something that it isn't, which is safety. And so I guess I want to get you guys' take on, is there any legitimacy to this stance, or is this strictly just McDonald's and in whole, maybe just corporate America, ignoring these issues and instead trying to divert it through claims of safety? What do you guys think?
I had a different take on this when I read the article. Well, first of all, not that I dislike or like Vice, but often it's a little sensationalized and kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, clickbaity, I guess, oh my gosh, McDonald's is spying on their employees. Well, essentially, if you're a large corporation like this and we're talking billions of dollars, and McDonald's is not only a food restaurant, but a real estate empire. This is an external and internal threat. And if you don't think that a major conglomerate is reviewing what workers are saying or what the pulse of these kind of external threats are, I think you're kind of naive. If even like what we think of as like a socially forward company like Starbucks that like offers their clients, you bet that they had some, even when they implemented their $15 an hour to workers, you bet they had some kind of analysis going on and some kind of pulse on what employees were doing and how this would affect their business. So for it to be done. Now, the other side of that is, like they're trying to suppress the wage of minimum wage workers. But I think, like the response to this, I guess, and it's a give and take, right? I think when you see $15 an hour minimum wage hit, you're going to see robots flipping burgers. You know what I mean? If they can employ a robot to flip a burger for less than what they can pay a human to do so, then it's going to happen. And so it's I guess, and I hate to say this, I guess it's less about like the how much somebody gets paid is the economics around this cog in the unit. You know what I mean? We're not talking about a really like a value added situation for somebody working at a fast food restaurant. We're talking about, a needed part of the operation that costs between X amount and X amount per hour. And if that can be then replicated by a robot or something, if they're forced into paying these workers more, then it's, I think the business decision behind that is different from like an emotional, like how much somebody's worth per hour, I think. So, and that may sound cold, but it's a business decision, I think, based upon, the external threat of this increase in wages. I would love to see everybody have a living wage and work on that. But the reality is if, a $15 an hour wage is offered to these workers, it's kind of the tipping point between when a machine can do it, and somebody can come in and do the cleanup on that machine and the maintenance on that machine for less than what you would pay a staff of 10 people during a shift, $15 an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I also think the context of McDonald's is part of the American vocabulary, the American experience. We think of it as, and so when you talk, whenever you have, setting McDonald's own internal employees aside, when the country has a discussion about minimum wage, how does that discussion get framed? Of course, it gets framed in the discussion as people who work at Walmart and McDonald's workers, and right, their name as a brand gets drawn into the discussion in some way, right? And so I think I look at this question, and I think like most things that you have to think about in terms of the ethics of business is at what point are you crossing the line in terms of what you should or shouldn't do? Because if you ask the question, if you're in the executive team of McDonald's and you basically ignore the fact that there's a minimum wage movement and your name is getting tossed around as part of a national movement related to minimum wage, and you just don't even think about it, like, I mean, that would be crazy, right? I mean, I think everybody would agree that not having a strategy, not having a position, not having some intelligence or thought or analysis of how does this affect our business? How does this affect our brand? How does the national movement to raise minimum wage and the fact that our name is going to be dragged into that discussion affect our brand? Not having some perspective on that and understanding it would be just silly if you were in the executive team at McDonald's, right? So then you take that to the next step and you say, okay, well, how exactly do you get perspective and intelligence and understanding of this movement and this issue? Is it okay for us to spy on our employees and track all their social media to gain that perspective? Well, that I don't know. I mean, I guess I kind of do know. I have an opinion about that, but I'm not going to lay it out here. I'm just going to say, yeah, maybe that's a step too far in that process. But I would just kind of back up and say the idea that they would want to get this perspective is not at all crazy. It's just, is it reasonable or ethical for them to go to that extent to get that perspective is also a legitimate question.
I guess I would have a not completely different take, but I just see this as a modern day. Living outside of Cleveland at one time, this was a very heavily, private sector union city. Private sector unions have been basically disappearing, so it's not as big of a deal as it used to be. But companies have employed these tactics for years when employees would try to unionize. they'd send spies into these groups, and they'd have all kinds of nefarious ways to try to find out what was going on, who the organizers were, what people were thinking. And I think, fast forward that, it probably goes back 30 or 40 years ago, but, fast forward to today, and we've got this thing called social media and the internet. Hey, of course, that's how they're going to spy on you. And I, whether right, wrong, good, bad, or indifferent, I mean, people don't have to understand whatever you say out on social media stays there. And it can and will be used against you. So, I thought, you look at that article, I mean, how many people don't get jobs because before they're extended that job offer, people go out to social media and they make a judgment on you based on what you say on social media. So I just, my take on this is this, obviously in the McDonald's vernacular, jumping from whatever they're paying now to $15 an hour would be very similar to being a private company being unionized and watching costs and be driven up. So, McDonald's is looking as a way to get out ahead of it, and they're just using the tools available to do it. And this, to me, is just a modern day tool that companies used to use to keep employees from unionizing.
I think that's exactly right. And so that's why I advise all people who are going to fight for 15, just set your name to the McDonald's CEO name before you go posting all your thoughts on LinkedIn. And then they can just go ahead and, look in on themselves, and that should solve everything. All right. Do you have another article we can talk about, AJ?
I sure do. This one comes from the Journal of Accountancy. And so actually, Alaska, Maine, and Oklahoma weigh CPA firm mobility bills. So for the uninitiated, if you're a CPA firm, you're a CPA, you're licensed by your local state. And depending on your state laws, it kind of determines if you can work across state lines, for lack of a better word, or if you need to be separately licensed in that state. And so quoting from the article here, a big priority of the AICPA now is firm mobility, which ensures firms can also work from state to state. This is from Marta, who is the AICPA President, State Regulatory and Legislative Affairs. That's a mouthful. It's equally important that clients and the public have access to various firms' subject matter expertise and services that may or may not be available to them in their home jurisdictions. So it goes on to talk about, the collaborations that's gone on with the AICPA and these local state bills that are coming into effect to essentially enhance or make easier the the ability for firms to work across state lines. And so I thought it was interesting. There's 30 states right now that have, allow their CPAs to work across state lines and have reciprocal laws in those other 30 states that allow it. And there's a list, I guess, in the article we'll have in the description. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was other occupations to look to us, talking about CPAs, when establishing their interstate models. Architects, for example, don't have firm mobility, and this is just another way that the CPA firm or CPA profession can distinguish itself from that field. I found that interesting because I didn't know that, the laws of civil engineering change from state to state. And the fact that if you're like a civil engineer in California, you can't design a building in North Dakota or something. So I found that kind of interesting and kind of a head scratcher as to why that would be, that maybe, the physics and the math changes in North Dakota as opposed to California. I can understand, it freezes in North Dakota, but doesn't so very often in California. But I guess the same kind of, I guess what was surprising was that I was just kind of under the impression that the CPA and the CPA firms were transferable and that this was even still an issue for some states. So I guess I'd like our panel to weigh in as to maybe if there's a reason why there shouldn't be like that cross-state, or cross-jurisdiction, for lack of a better word, ability to work as a CPA or a CPA firm, or if this is kind of, I guess, a state-by-state kind of thing where we feel like it's, I guess the article lays out good points on why, if you're a manufacturer in North Dakota, but North Dakota, there's not a large CPA firm that has manufacturing expertise in North Dakota. You would want to employ somebody from somewhere else that would have that strong manufacturing background and expertise. So I'd like to get your guys' take on this and whether or not it's kind of a moot point or if it's something that you think is important.
Professional regulations are ostensibly to protect the consumer, but in reality, they often end up being things designed to protect professionals under some context, right? And so I think, if you think about it from that side, I don't know what the impetus of restricting CPA work to the states that you were licensed in, what the impetus of that is, but you can kind of brainstorm on how does that potentially protect consumers. I mean, effectively what it does is it would theoretically prevent smaller firm CPAs from doing work outside of their jurisdictions, which means that, if you are a company in another state that you would be seeking services, you would be getting your services from a small firm within your state or from a larger national firm or regional firm that has more resources and is licensed across multiple states. And maybe the argument there is that the consumer is better served that way because they either have a firm with more resources that can have the expertise that they really need for their location, or they have a firm that is specialized in their location by virtue of being there. But on the flip side, it's is it actually to protect CPAs and jobs and professions, right? Like if you are a smaller firm CPA or a small CPA firm, these rules have in some part served to prevent just a horde of small CPA firms from other states trying to eat your lunch, right? If your potential client base is not the kind of client base that would end up working with a national firm, you at least have a smaller competitive space if no one outside your state should theoretically be coming into your state and doing work as a CPA. I don't know how much these rules are really being adhered to in practice, dare I say. And I also wonder if this is being revisited now. It kind of seems like this would be the right time to revisit it with the fact that everyone is working remotely and the opportunity for CPAs sitting in California, Oregon, Washington to be serving clients in New York and Florida and any other state I can mention on the other side of the coast, right? The opportunity is there much greater than it has been in the past. And so I think these rules being on the books are going to be stretched and challenged even more. Because I don't even know, when you think about that, like what exactly does that mean? I mean, if you are practicing from within your state for companies that are outside of your state, do some of these states have regulations that would be against that? I mean, that may be something I should know, but I would say I don't know that for sure exactly how that works. But yeah, I think it's probably an archaic. To me, it feels like an archaic set of rules that our current circumstances dictate should be revisited.
I'm usually not a fan of these types of things that restrict commerce. Now there could be a valid reason for it for somebody practices inside your state. I mean, CPA licenses are given at a state level. If you think if there's a supplemental or something that you need to give them to, pass at your state level, hey, that's fine. But to make these kind of restrictions, the obvious one that everybody always talks about is crazy that you can't buy health insurance across straight lines. How is that protecting the consumer? It's artificially, giving them protected territories so they can kind of control costs. Generally, competition is what's going to help, consumers, as long as they are, like I say, being regulated. It's not the Wild West. You don't have unqualified people coming into your state providing services. But, just look at the CPA firm that lands a client that has, factories in 3 different states. I mean, you're just making things harder on them than it needs to be. So I'm not a big fan of these types of restrictions.
Totally right, Jack. And I think one thing that we haven't talked about, but I think kind of if this opens up for interstate, I would caution those small CPA firms that would try to move into a different state to make sure that you have, especially in the tax realm, the state specific tax training to know the differences. Because I mean, we live in, the majority of our team is in Oregon, and you talk about the difference between like Oregon tax code, Washington tax code, California tax code, it'll make your head spin. You know what I mean? And all the particulars that go along with that, and being able to kind of like navigate that whole system, especially if you have clients that have, locations in all three. So I can kind of see and understand that from a tax perspective, but from an overall accounting perspective, I don't necessarily know. But you got another article there for us, Jack?
Sure do. So if we talk about the burnout and doom and gloom of COVID, I've kind of got a bookend article that kind of talks about, what the world's going to look like post-COVID. And the U.S. economy is kind of primed and ready for a huge growth year as we come post-COVID. I mean, I think there's still some things interesting that we need to work out. I mean, we've been able to sustain a pretty decent economy with the higher number of people unemployed than we've had in recent years. But I think there's a lot of things in place that could be a catalyst for some boom years. Unfortunately, a lot of this money we've been pumping into the system, I think a lot of people have panicked this week because bond yields are going up, and there's the fear of inflation. So that might curb some of the enthusiasm. But I think we are kind of primed to. I think there'll be a different way of doing business. I guess the only thing that I would caution is even when they kind of take off the majority of the restrictions or all of the restrictions, are some people going to still live like we still have those restrictions? Are they not going to go out? Are they going to? I mean, it's going to change habits and everything. But I think we're probably in a pretty good spot to see some decent growth in the next year or two. What does the group think?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that a lot of these things are going to be changes that don't get undone, and that we've just now learned to live this way. And so that will just continue. But, that's the thing about growth. I mean, it's always relative to whatever the last thing was. And so I think since the last year has been a really hard period for people, then of course the growth of the next year should be that much, should look that much stronger. And so, yeah, I think we'll continue to see these types of changes just become part of kind of our DNA, so to speak, as a consumer. And I think that will continue into the next year, and we'll keep, evolving to do business in this new world that we find ourselves in. But yeah, I think it'll be a strong year. What do you think, AJ?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm less optimistic. I think, there's good signs and there's bad signs, I guess. And in the bad signs that I see are real estate, good luck finding a house that's reasonably priced to purchase, just about anywhere in America right now. You look at like raw materials or, like the supply chain disruptions that have happened, especially in electronics through, just the recent upgrade in graphics cards, the fact that you can't find a new graphics card out there to save your life on what the manufactured suggested retail price is. It's all double or triple, because of supply chain constraints and scalpers. I mean, I think I'm cautiously optimistic about the outlook and hoping that it goes the right way. But I think, there's some warning signs out there that it's not all sunshine and rainbows on the horizon. And I think, some of it's been propped up, I think. So, I mean, maybe I'm biased because I used to be in the construction trade, and, they used to say as houses go, the market goes. But I don't know. I guess I'm kind of holding the middle ground here. I'm not optimistic. I'm not pessimistic about it, but I would say, I guess, time will tell whether or not I'm right on this or not. But I guess we could be primed for a recession or for a downturn in the economy, and we'll just have to wait and see.
I love how AJ's examples come back to some kind of gaming where the pandemic is creating a supply shortage in the supply chain, which ultimately affects graphics cards. And you know what that means, everybody. AJ's not getting his game on, and that's a problem.
I think he's making some good points, I will say. I think he's right. whatever happens with graphics cards is what is what really matters. That's the meat and potatoes. And so, yeah, I think we're all screwed.
It used to be how goes the house industry. Now it's how goes the graphic card industry or the gaming industry. But AJ, I think you might have actually even invented a word in there somewhere around cautiously, but I don't know. Well, we'll have to roll the tape on that one.
It would not be the first, but and it will not be the last.
All right,
how about you, Charlie? You got another article?
Yeah, I've got one we could talk about. I think it's well placed because as AJ was talking about, it's been a hard time to find a video card, and especially hard because, as I found out in Ars Technica, there's an article called "It's been confirmed: Fry's Electronics is going out of business, shutting down all stores." Now, this is a local chain, semi-local. I know it's been on the West Coast and in a few other places. Here, it's been a big part of kind of growing up as a video game nerd is that you would go to Fry's and find all your favorite video cards and these sorts of things. And if you've been going to these kinds of stores in the last like 10 years, you'll see that the shelves have they've been becoming increasingly barren, right? There's just nothing on there. And I've always known that, of course, this is because of Amazon and people are buying things online now. And so you've kind of seen Fry's go down the way of the dodo. But the thing that I didn't know that I learned from this article is that there were some events, there were some other events that kind of played into that. And so apparently during the 2000s, there had been one of the major executives inside of Fry's embezzled $65 million from the company, and it was able to somehow live through that. But part of the way that it lived through that is that it transitioned into consignment style selling. And so nobody wanted to do that anymore because all these retailers who had these products could just go and sell them online. So why send them to Fry's and hope they sell when they really might not? And so that's been kind of the buildup as to why this has happened. But I guess I want to get your guys' take on, like we're talking about earlier, is this the new way of doing business? Is Fry's going to just kind of go away and electronic stores as a whole will start to go away? Or are we going to start seeing maybe some big competitors? There's a brand called Micro Center that's popular on the East Coast. And so you could say, well, that's what's going to take over Fry's. I want to get your guys' take. Is that what's happening here? Or yeah.
No, I actually I've been looking forward to talking about this article because I was actually stunned that there was actually an electronics retailer still afloat. So that's why I looked into the article and I saw that it was California centric, and Charlie's expounded on. Yeah, they actually tried to do things a little bit of a different way to try to survive. But, I know Circuit City went belly up years ago. They were a national one, and Radio Shack outlasted them. But I think they've been gone now in the last 2 or 3 years. And I thought it was kind of down to Best Buy was the only one doing that. So I was really kind of surprised to find out there were actually some regional firms that were able to stay open and stay competitive. Now, if they were based in California with the massive shutdowns, that couldn't have helped them. But I guess I was kind of stunned to find out that there's still these electronics retailers out there, because the old joke is always they're just a showroom for Amazon. And with people not needing to go out of the house, now they're not even going shopping at brick and mortar stores. I mean, they're doing all their shopping online. I mean, I think I can't imagine. I think like I say, in the long game, I can't imagine any of these smaller ones surviving. What's the rest of the gang?
So actually, I kind of have a different take on this. I think you mentioned in the intro there, Charlie, like Micro Center on the East Coast, and they're actually doing okay from what I can tell. I've had friends that have actually purchased computer systems in the last 6 months from a Micro Center in Detroit. But I think the difference here is Fry's made the wrong pivot. What Micro Center, Best Buy, and Newegg and all these kind of things have pivoted to is a digital kind of footprint where you can shop online and then go pick it up in a store, Walmart included. Their electronics section. They've shifted from being like a brick and mortar, you go into the store, look around, pick out a video game, a computer, a TV, to you find the item that you want to purchase online. You can research the price difference or the price savings that you would save, and then you can pick it up or have it delivered via Best Buy, Micro Center, Newegg, whatever that retailer is, where Fry's made that pivot to, okay, let's sell secondhand or consignment electronics, which I don't think electronics are obsolete in 6 months, and you're talking about selling a refurbished or a used or a consignment piece. I think it's the wrong pivot. And if they wanted to make the right pivot, they should have kind of followed in what Best Buy had set out, where they provide excellent customer service, an in-store experience, an in-store pickup, support, etc., as opposed to kind of, I guess, race to the bottom of consignment used, for lack of a better word, crap electronics that are a couple years old. So I think it speaks more to, and then you levy that on top of them having an embezzlement problem and having 65 million just disappear off of their sales sheet or bottom line. I mean, that's a lot to overcome. So I don't necessarily know that it's the death of brick and mortar. I think brick and mortar needs to divert or pivot to a strategy that includes an online sale and differentiate itself from the Amazons and the Newegg's of the world.
All right. Good take on it. I agree completely. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Do you have another article we can talk about, AJ?
Actually, I don't, but Ty brought one to the table this week.
All right. Ty, what do you got?
Yeah, so this article was from the Wall Street Journal. Companies putting the best face on COVID-19, the financial impact of COVID-19, and they had two kind of key examples in there of companies that were going in opposite directions. But this was like the classic tale of earnings management in the COVID era, right? And how do you kind of tell your investors or tell the community, tell the public the best story about your company, or the story at least that you want to tell about the company. So one of the companies they looked at was Ulta Beauty, which typically had operating income typically I should say, it had operating income back in 2019 of about $613 million. And during the health crisis, through the 9 months ending in October, its operating income was down to $13 million. And so, they had to deal with their retail, and they had to deal with closing, having stores shut down. And I didn't say this, but I'm sure there's lots of other problems involved that affect that. But any retail is suffering at this stage, or has been suffering in that regard. So what they did in their financial statements, being a public company, is they created this metric called adjusted operating income, where they added back a bunch of what they considered to be one-time charges, including $40 million of impairment charges. Took me a little, I had to kind of read this twice to do the math, because their adjusted operating income, they went from the 13 million of what we'd call GAAP operating income to 98 million of adjusted operating income, right? Which is still far less than the 613 that they had in 2019, but 98 million is better than 13, right? So the adjusted operating income, again, was by design to add back kind of things that were considered to be one time related to COVID, related to the pandemic. But what the article kind of pointed out, or took some exception with, is the point that that while they took out those one-time charges, the $98 million leaves in $51 million of federal tax benefits. So they said, well, what would our income look like without the one-time expenses, but keeping the one-time tax benefits that came from COVID as well, that were designed to help companies through COVID. And the article doesn't talk about what those federal benefits are. Actually, it calls them federal aid, but I suspect, they did say at one point that it was federal tax credits. I suspect it was in the payroll area, because there was a whole suite of payroll tax credits, including, we've talked about here, the employee retention credit, but there was also payroll tax credits related to following the process for the Family Medical Leave Act and giving people time off if they were dealing with COVID and things like that were kind of in federal stimulus packages last year. So I suspect that's the nature of the credits that we're talking about. But the point being, those credits only existed for COVID. And so, it's interesting that in this case, they would take out the one-time expenses, but leave in the one-time credits. to come up with their 98 million. So window dressing, right? And then going the other direction, though, and you might scratch your head and wonder, well, why would you even do this? The Wall Street Journal reported, American Airlines also reported kind of a GAAP and a non-GAAP loss for the year, but their non-GAAP loss was actually larger than their GAAP loss. So when I say GAAP, I mean generally accepted accounting principles. So GAAP. So their American Airlines, without making any kind of special adjusted income or a loss, would have had a $8.9 billion net loss. But then they make a bunch of adjustments and show, but actually without the COVID related items, our net loss would be 9.5 billion. It would be even more. And the mystery behind that is simply that there was a bunch of federal, I was going to say bailout money, but there was a bunch of federal pandemic aid that the airline got to the tune of $3 billion involved. And so in any case, if they take out the one-time expenses, but they also, in their case, took out the one-time benefits they got from federal aid, it actually caused their loss to go up. And it makes you scratch your head and wonder, well, why would you even report it that way if you're American Airlines? But it's a reminder of the fact that, when you compare these two companies, Ulta Beauty and then American Airlines, is that the incentives to manage earnings is really about telling the story you want to tell. And it's not always geared in one direction, right? And so you can imagine if you're in American Airlines position, everyone knows that you're losing a lot, right? And so just telling people you're losing less wouldn't be all that helpful. What could be helpful, and I'm putting motivations on them, so I'm not reporting here. I don't know what they were thinking, but I would propose what could be helpful in their situation is telling people, hey, if we take out all these one-time things, our loss was actually bigger than you might think. We really hit the dirt and really hit bottom last year with COVID, and that just makes things look better in the future, right? So in the future, as they climb out of that, they can tell a story of how much better they're doing. They can show a better increase over 9.5 billion loss than if they were showing an increase over an 9.9 billion loss, right? And what I would suspect they know is the market's not going to punish them anymore for that extra $500 million at this point. So anyway, that's my thought on it. What do you guys think?
I think it gives a whole new meaning to stopgap. You stopgap and then you report an earning or a loss that's more what you think. But I thought the interesting part of the article, and I think what it highlights is, you can put a set of financials together that's outside of GAAP that can represent what you and tell the story you want it to tell. And I think it kind of like reiterated that if we have a standard set of rules, whether that be GAAP, US GAAP, IFRS or whatever it is, if everybody's reporting on the same kind of generalized rules, you get to a point where you can compare apples to apples. But when you start letting people be creative or remove items that they think are a one-time cost, you can adjust the financials and your earnings and your reporting to reflect what you wanted to reflect. And you had two opposite ends of the spectrum there with Ultra, which I have a kind of a bougie wife and daughter, and I know exactly what Ulta is because I've seen that charge show up on my charge card many a times. They sell hair dryers and beauty products, and they're a brick and mortar. So of their prior earnings, I'm sure my bottom line was in there quite a bit. But you have them trying to show a benefit, and kind of adjusting earnings to make the picture sunnier. And then you have Boeing, or was it Boeing, the airline that was trying to show the opposite. And I would even put more motivation, or, this is my editorial spin on it than Ty. I think when you present something like that, then you have a case to go to regulators for relief. Look at how much we lost, even with our COVID. If we even strip out the COVID, look at the billions of dollars we lost in this industry. We need help. And so, and then to couple that, then when airline travel rebounds, the CEO and the CFO can turn around and say, look at how much we've grown the business from this huge loss to now we have a profit in the following year. So I think, what was clear to me is that like GAAP, IFRS, some kind of standard reporting is needed to be able to, for lack of a better word, cut out the bullshit of trying to manipulate reports and have an apples to apples, everybody's playing by the same set of rules on how you account for things. But it also demonstrates that if you want to, you can strip out things and kind of focus on what you need to in a non-GAAP way to present something that needs to be presented, I guess, if you're trying to get a point across. And the real difference here is these are SEC, they have to follow a different set, a more stringent set of rules and presentation than like a small business. But if you want to get to the nuts and bolts of it, you can present financial statements from a lot of different ways by stripping things out and moving outside a GAAP to represent what you want to.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think you've hit on a lot of the key points just to kind of keep going with it. I mean, if you spent any amount of time speaking to a struggling business owner and then ask them how their business is doing, you will find all sorts of creative ways to review the numbers. If these zeros just weren't here, then we'd be fine. And if I just read these lines and then, don't read those ones, then we'll be fine. And so we've all kind of seen that. And I think there's a reason why these reports are done by a third party. I mean, basically, companies are, hiring accounting firms to put together these types of reports so that we can have an apples to apples comparison and know how a company's doing. And I think, as somebody who's been in there, I've typed those words, adjusted operating income. I know how that feels. I know how spinning the numbers to show the story you're trying to tell can feel like the right thing to do. And it is all relative. It's whatever you give today. And then if you give a different answer tomorrow, it's, what, like you said, you primed them with this big bad news so that everything else looks better. And so I think that's why we're seeing all these different ways of looking at it. But I've been in that room and I've been in those discussions. And they're, these people who create these companies are creative, right? They've got creative ways to look at stuff. And so that's what gets you into these scenarios. And I think that's why KPIs have to be taken with a grain of salt. I mean, that's the answer leading up to this before, is that if you're looking at net income and it's not telling you the story that you want it to tell, then you should be able to use some KPI that at least illustrates why you think you're still doing well. And that was a separate place in the financials that had its own, there was net income was on its own line, and the things we think matter, like customer count or whatever else we use to tell ourselves we're doing fine, had its own place. And so I just think there needs to be that separation. There needs to be a clear way of comparing these. And the more we start accepting these pseudo net incomes that come from whatever we came up with, it just, I think, really just takes away a lot of the legitimacy of the financials.
If you torture numbers long enough, you can get them to say anything. Thanks for joining us on this week's YouTube channel broadcast of None of Our Businesses. Hope you enjoyed it. Tell your family, friends, colleagues about us. Hit the like button, give us maximum likes, share it, tell your friends about us, and we'll see you all back here next week for another edition. Have a great week, everybody.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.